buddy Robie. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. It's good to be on.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. I don't know why, but the past week, every conversation has had some tie back to Joe Williams, and he's a childhood idol of mine. And so I've known your name because that 1997 famous season, obviously you wrestled Joe in the finals. We'll talk about that. But I got to go back to your early days because I was surprised to learn that you were like an in-season wrestler only. You just kind of went to Edinboro because that was like, the local school and you had more of a football prowess. So what was life like growing up for you in Erie, PA?
A lot different than it is, I think, for a lot of kids, especially now. I mean, obviously, it was a long time ago, right? So the world has changed significantly in that time. But it was, for me, it was different. I mean, I was in a situation where I just wasn't exposed to a whole lot of life outside of the little fishbowl that I lived in, which consisted of about, probably a couple square miles and the friends that I had and my brother and just, it was definitely, I guess, small in a lot of cases, a good way to describe it, and not being aware of everything else and all the opportunities that was out there. And, I like, you mentioned, I didn't really wrestle a lot. I wrestled for a couple months during the season, and that was really about it. And you could probably get away with it a little bit more back then. It would be really hard to do right now. But back in the day, it was a little more commonplace, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it definitely held me back a little bit, I think, in high school. And then and even early on in my college career, I was playing catch up big time compared to most people. But, fortunately, I was able to catch up, and things worked out pretty good for me.
How'd you end up at Edinboro?
Just to be honest, I didn't have a lot of options. I went on 3 official visits. I went to Indiana and Bloomington when Joe McFarland was actually the head coach there, and who I later coached with at Michigan for 4 years. So I joked with him when I was there a lot because they had me on a visit, but they didn't make me an offer. I was kind of an afterthought, probably planned, C or D or F for them. So they didn't make me an offer. And I went to Lock Haven because, it was a similar school to Edinboro, and it was in state. And I went to Edinboro, and Edinboro was the only school that made me any kind of a scholarship offer, and it wasn't a lot. And quite honestly, it was 20 minutes from home. My brother went to school there. All my friends went to school there. To me, going a couple hours away from home at that particular point probably would have been something that would have taken a lot of consideration on my part. So it just kind of worked out, but it was a blessing in disguise, quite honestly. I think just being at a small school and having the ability to be around some really good people at that particular time that were in place at Edinboro and that came in during my time at Edinboro really helped, put me on the path to where I am today.
Yeah, I love the story of your freshman year where you really fell in love with wrestling and made a lot of lifestyle choices or changes, I should say. Before we get to that, though, I'm just curious, like when you walk in a room as a freshman and Bruce Baumgartner is the coach, does it really sink in how legendary this guy is? Or because you weren't that familiar, he was just another coach? I mean, it's pretty unique to have that.
No, I knew. I mean, being from Erie, too, obviously, it was so close that Bruce was he was kind of a superstar in that area. So I was well aware of how great of a wrestler he was. But it was almost the more you got to know Bruce, the less that was really an issue, just because he was such a modest, down-to-earth guy and very relatable, and certainly had zero ego whatsoever. So, the more I got to know Bruce, the less that, I guess, I don't know, putting him in awe or putting him on a pedestal, that wore off pretty quick. And he just became, another guy and your coach.
Yeah, and you guys had, I think Lou Roselli was a senior then, and then Tim Flynn was there. And so I was listening to your interview on the Mark Bader show, and I heard you say that like your first week, you didn't know what a high crotch was. You just didn't have that much experience to the college wrestling, but obviously you had an incredible career. And now you're one of the top coaches in the game. So what was the turning point your freshman year when things changed for you?
So when I got to Edinboro, like I said, I mean, I didn't even know, I wouldn't say I was along for the ride, but I was wrestling because it was an opportunity. I didn't really have a lot else flying at that particular time, so I was like, heck, I'll give it a shot. But I didn't go in there with like real high goals of being a national champ, or really didn't know if I could even make it, quite honestly, as a Division I wrestler. So the first 6 months or so was really hard for me, just getting acclimated to the training aspect of it and the commitment aspect of it. It was night and day from what I was used to. When I was in high school, I worked out during wrestling season. I didn't put my wrestling shoes on for 5-6 months a lot of times at a time. So certainly never worked out twice a day, and never worked out to the level of intensity that was going on at that particular time at Edinboro. So it took a little while to acclimate to it. But for me, I wrestled as a true freshman too, which it was good and bad, I guess. Looking back on it, it'd be nice to have redshirted. I think I would have been an All-American another time, and it would help your credentials a lot. But it was good in a way that I got acclimated pretty quick. I learned what it was about, and I also learned that I could be pretty good. And I think about halfway through the season, I picked up a couple pretty decent wins over some guys who were ranked maybe in the top 12, and it was kind of back and forth. I'd have a good win and maybe a bad loss, a good win, a bad loss. But just I had the realization that, that these guys really weren't any better than me, that this is something that I could do, right? And I knew that I had some intangible qualities that I think helped me get to where I am today, or get me through college wrestling. And a lot of that was my relationship with Tim Flynn and Lou Roselli in particular, and those guys really, I think, help build my confidence and really see that you could make something of this. And for me, that was pretty cool, and it was definitely a big part of my development in that first year. But yeah, in terms of any specific moment, I don't know if there was a specific moment, but I do recall once that season was over, and I didn't even, back then, they had the qualification system for the Nationals was a lot different. So a lot of times the guys that deserved to go to the Nationals didn't go, and I didn't qualify for the NCAAs. I think I took 5th in the EWL tournament out of 8 guys or something. And after that season, something clicked for me, and I never liked to lose, though. I mean, that was one thing that I've had my whole life, is losing just wasn't something that I was okay with. So once I think I made the decision that this was going to be something that I was going to go all in on. It also triggered a certain amount of work ethic and desire and commitment level that I hadn't had before. So it was probably a combination of all those things.
How did it change your life outside of wrestling too? I mean, were you like dieting right, student, your grades were on point, everything changed, or?
Really, I think a lot of things changed. Certainly, I grew up in an environment where, I don't know, discipline wasn't exactly front and center for me in high school and early on in my college career, and in all aspects of my life. So the discipline, I think I learned through that my freshman year, and even into my high school football career a little bit, really kind of, I think, catapulted me and helped me change things. And I knew I wanted more. I knew that I was capable of more. And like I said, I was really competitive, and I really, really wanted to win when I was out there. But I didn't always want to win, Monday through Thursday. And that changed for me. And as soon as I, realized that's what I had to do, I wanted to be elite. I made some changes, made some sacrifices, and got a lot better, quite honestly, pretty quick. And it was a fun process.
It's so fun to talk to people from your generation, where you literally, I can't tell you how many people from your exact age said, the first time I watched a college dual meet was when I was on the college team. And just the jumps that you could have back then, because the skill level in high school wasn't what it is now. Now with the RTCs, kids are around college coaches all the time. So you literally could see jumps like that, where you come in, I think you had like a 17-13 record, still pretty respectable for a true freshman. But then the next year you have like 2 losses and you lose to Benyon in OT, or Malika in OT, excuse me. So you don't really see that. Do you still see that as much on your team now, or guys come in with such a level that it's hard to see those jumps?
Not nearly as much, right? Because like you mentioned, I mean, I think kids are number one, kids are not playing multiple sports as much in high school, really even in middle school in a lot of cases right now. I mean, I've got a son that's in 8th grade that, he made the decision I wanted him to play football, but he just said, I don't want to play football. I want to focus on wrestling. So back then you didn't see that as much. I mean, kids did a lot of things, and I think athletically it makes you better in the long run, but probably puts you behind in terms of your wrestling acumen and your technical part of the sport. So yeah, definitely. And then the internet changed things in addition to the RTCs and the access to really good coaching. I think once the internet got huge, I mean, you got to remember this was 1990. I graduated high school in 1992, so it was a long time ago. The world got a lot smaller and kids got exposed to a lot of different things. And, heck, now they're watching technique videos, and they're watching wrestling. They're watching the Russian nationals on their phone in bed. Like you said, I had never even been to a college wrestling match until I was wrestling in one, and I guess would be the fall of 1992.
Yeah. What do you think the biggest impacts were? Was it was it you had world-class coaching for the first time and then like you made a decision for yourself to get better? Or do you think like if you would have had those coaches in high school, you would have been that good? Or was it more of like an attitude thing?
I think it was a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I would have been I think athletically I was good enough to be good. In high school, listen, I was solid in high school. I took third in Pennsylvania twice. Some of it was too just never wrestling in big environments or big events. Sometimes you get to the state tournament and you'd never wrestled outside of a high school gym, and then you're wrestling at this big arena, and it's the Pennsylvania state tournament and everybody's making a big deal about it, and dealing with that pressure was something that I wasn't good at in high school, that I had to learn how to get better at. But definitely I think those two things build upon each other. When you have really good coaching, really good environment, really good training partners, and you as you get better, you start to build confidence too. And then, confidence and work ethic and success all go hand in hand. And for me, it was all of those things. But, it definitely, I couldn't have done it without the help of the people that you mentioned. It was a huge part of my development, and, still guys that are, I go on vacation with every year. I mean, really my best friends. So that's pretty cool. When I look back at my experience at Edinboro, going in there and then leaving, and then to where I am today and the relationships that I have, that's something that's pretty special that I don't think that I would have gotten at a lot of other places.
Especially if it was like some big school where maybe you were, a number on the wall, so to speak. You hear that all the time. But I mean, obviously you made it through, had an awesome career, finalist, 2-time All-American. Talk about the changes to your game at Michigan, not in terms of your competitive game, but your coaching game. Because that was you had 2 stops before that, but you were a full-on paid coach. You had you moved your family out there. So what were some of the big takeaways from life in the Big Ten?
Yeah, it was a great experience for me moving. I had coached at Edinboro for 2 years, and I was at West Virginia for a year, and we had really good teams. The year I was at West Virginia, I think we finished 8th in the country, and the 2 years I was at Edinboro, we had Jason Robinson was in the NCAA finals, Josh Koscheck was in the NCAA finals, so had some success. But when I made the move to go to Michigan, I stopped competing entirely and made the transition from where you're kind of half athlete, half coach to full-time coach. And I walked into a good situation at Michigan. We had some good guys. Ryan Bertine came in the same year that I came in. He redshirted the first year, but Andy Rovat was there. Mike Kulzicki was there. We had some good guys. They had recruited well. Actually, Sean Ormet was the assistant coach prior to me coming in. So Sean left, and then I replaced Sean. Sean moved back to Chicago to start overtime at that particular time. So, he had done a good job bringing in some good kids. But, it was cool because I think when you're, in your late 20s, early 30s, and you can get on the mat a lot you develop some good relationships, and I think you can make a huge impact probably then more so than when you're 47 years old like I am now, in terms of getting on the mat and helping guys get better with the technical and the wrestling part of things. So I went all in and really spent a lot of time with those guys, and I was close in age with them. So and really had a lot in common with a lot of those guys. Ryan Bertine was somebody that I really hit it off with and was really close with. And I think it helped a little bit and on his journey. So I think that was just the biggest thing, is really jumping in head first into coaching at that particular point, and making sure that it was my number one priority every single day.
Did you have a lot of relationships with the Michigan alum in that group before going in there? Or was that kind of your first experience with that whole, cause that's a pretty tight knit group with the Trellas and that whole scene up there. They all seem pretty tight knit.
No, I hadn't. I had actually, it's funny, that summer before I got hired at Michigan in, I think it was like early fall. And that summer I went and did a camp in Cleveland, Ohio. And the guy that was running the camp was close with Ryan Bertine. So I was there for like 3 days, and Ryan had come on a visit to Edinboro. So I got to know him. I hung out with him when he was on his visit to Edinboro. I didn't really recruit him because I was, the volunteer coach at the time, but I spent a whole day with him, and we, kind of hit it off. And then while I was at that camp, we spent a ton of, we drilled together. I remember leaving there, and this was when I was still coaching at Edinboro, going back and talking to Tim Flynn. I was like, man, this kid's going to be special, because his just desire to be great. I mean, every chance he got to work out with me, he was asking me to work out. So he'd ask me in between sessions. He'd ask me to stay afterward, after the camp was over, to drill with him, to wrestle with him. And so we developed a relationship there. And then, when Joe had called me to go to Michigan, that helped a little bit with my transition. Me and Sean used to wrestle a lot too. So that, I think, maybe was part of it, just Joe being aware of me, and I had a pretty good relationship with Sean, even though we competed against each other. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but you're right. It's a close-knit family there. And while I was there, I got to know the Trellas really, really well. Coached Ryan, recruited Josh. I think I left Josh's after his true freshman year, in which he redshirted, if I can remember correctly, but, still really tight with all those guys.
Were you there with Tannenbaum at all, or was that after your time?
Yeah, Eric was, I was a year or two with Eric. Yeah. Yep. He was another one you could just tell early on he was going to be really, really good, and so explosive, so fast, and great worker. But yeah, Eric's probably one of the more underrated guys that nobody ever talks about. He was really good.
4-time All-American. Yeah, he's a legend. I did a little audio documentary project on him when he was a sophomore in high school. He was like 86-0 and got pinned in the state finals by a kid who he had already beaten. So it's like, it's folklore in Illinois, and the story had to be told. But now that I'm talking about it with you, I imagine you were probably the guy coming to Naperville to recruit him. Were you like the main guy recruiting Tannenbaum?
I wouldn't say I was the main guy. I think Joe probably recruited him. I was involved for sure, but I didn't have a ton of ties in Illinois. So, Joe was definitely involved in that more than I was at that particular time. But I worked with Eric a lot his freshman year before I left.
Yeah, no, he's awesome, man. He's a medical doctor doing knee and hip surgeries now in Indiana. He's just a shining example of what you want. He's an awesome guy. So I got to ask, so you talked about how it's difficult to recruit in a state where you're not really from. Is that true even when you're a head coach as well? Because I know you were at Binghamton for a year and they were rebuilding, but you weren't familiar. So I was familiar with New York necessarily. So I always wanted to ask, is it hard to recruit in a state you're not from, or does the head coach title kind of take care of the rest?
I think the institution you're at helps a little bit too, and the success that your program has had. I think initially when me and Dresser came to Virginia Tech, it was not easy to recruit, just because, we hadn't had a lot of success and the program was in a little bit of turmoil at that particular point. So when you're at a school like Virginia Tech, I don't think it's that hard, but you do seem, at least we've seemed to develop are the areas that we like to recruit in, that we've had success recruiting in. And a lot of that times that's just because you're familiar with those areas, you're comfortable, you have connections. So for us, it's, we've really landed a lot in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Ohio, is where we do a lot of our recruiting. And fortunately for us, those areas are all relatively close and they're all pretty good wrestling states. But it's, we really probably do need to branch out a little bit more and start recruiting the Midwest and the West Coast. The Midwest is tough simply because there's a lot of really good options for kids to go to school, that are a lot closer than Blacksburg or Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, you think about a state like Illinois, and PA, in Ohio, of course, great high school states. The choices these kids have is ridiculous. I mean, if you're in Chicago, you could go to Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Northwestern, University of Illinois, all without missing a beat, and like it's all within driving range. So when you look at the ACC and the rise of the schools out there, it's awesome to see because it's quickly becoming one of the top conferences in the country. You got Pat Papalizio out there, the Virginia, UNC. It's awesome to see it. But man, back when you joined in 06, it wasn't Virginia Tech still a name, but were there any doubts like you were going to the ACC coming from the Big Ten? I mean, what was that thought process and kind of how has the ACC grown over the years?
Well, it was easy when I came down here to check Virginia Tech out. It was pretty easy to tell that we could be good.
Why do you say that?
Just because you get on this campus and once you get down here to Blacksburg, it's an incredibly nice place. And it's just got a great feel to it. And anybody that we bring on campus, whether they end up coming to school here or not, really kind of falls in love with it. It's really that nice. So for me, when I came down here, I knew that we could recruit well here, and I knew we'd have to have some success, but it was easy to see that, there was some things that this place had that, that you can't either have it or you don't type of deal. So some schools are fortunate, some schools aren't. So for me, it was easy to tell that, Virginia Tech could be really good in the sport of wrestling. And it took a little while for us to get it to where we wanted to be. And I think a lot of the ACC schools have the same thing. I mean, they're great campuses, their locations are awesome. Big time athletics, great academics. There's a lot to sell.
And you were joining there, Coach Dresser, I didn't realize this until looking at your background, that he was a high school coach before taking over. Obviously had won, state titles at like 2 or 3 schools it looked like, but pretty crazy that he had come from the high school ranks and then just started building right away. What was something you picked up from working with Dresser, like month 1 or 2 on the job?
Well, yeah, you're right. Well, he was a highly successful high school coach in this area. So, and he was coaching at Christiansburg High School, which is right down the road, which is actually where my kids go to school now. So, Kevin is got a lot of really good qualities. One of the things that he's, probably the biggest thing that I learned from him being around him is just how important a lot of the things outside of the wrestling room are. He really understood how important it was. He kind of had a Jay Robinson kind of mentality a little bit in terms of marketing and promoting the program and making sure, putting a priority on getting fans in the seats and really developing the program from that level as well as from the wrestling room. And I think it's something that made an impact on me for sure. Probably the biggest thing outside of the wrestling room was just that kind of vision that he had. Yeah,
it's his first press conference. He came in and said that Virginia Tech, was going to win a national title at some point. And a lot of people say that, but it's cool to see someone who's that outspoken, but also puts the work in for it. What are some of the biggest differences between being an assistant coach and being a head coach? Because you were named the head coach in 2017, and I'm sure you probably felt you were ready long before that. And just curious, like what's some of the biggest changes?
Well, I think for sure some of the things we just kind of talked about. I think, being an assistant coach, it's a lot more just wrestling and recruiting, right? And as the head coach, you've got to make every decision. You've got to be able to manage the people. You've got to be, you have to have you have to wear a lot of different hats. Fundraising is incredibly important. Marketing is incredibly important. Getting on shows like this and being able to communicate with your fan base is really important. Being able to, have relationships with your administrators and deal with the administration, all of those things, and managing the guys in the team outside of the wrestling room. So it's definitely, there's a lot of differences in the jobs, and it probably takes away from a little bit what you can do on the mat when you do become the head coach. But I think those are the biggest differences in my opinion, as opposed to being an assistant coach. You think the head coaching job's really easy, but it's a lot harder than you think.
But it's probably hard to wrestle every day still when you get to like 35, 40, because the assistants are expected to wrestle or at least be on the mat most of the time.
No question. Yeah. I mean, it's, as you get, I'm 47, or I'll be 47 in May. So that ship has sailed. I get on the mat a little bit here and there and drill and spar, but I'm not wrestling a whole lot. I can promise you that much.
So one of the years at Virginia Tech I was excited to ask you about is 2011. And I think that was the year the Nationals were in Philly. You guys went in and you had some high hopes, didn't pan out how you wanted. But I'm more curious about like the days and weeks after, when you have a whole season that you're excited for and thought you could do real well and it didn't turn out how you wanted. Like, how do you process that as a coach, and what were some of the memories from that 2011 tournament?
Yeah, they weren't good, right? I mean, it was definitely underachieving, is I guess the best way to put it, and it was disappointing. We had a pretty good team. We had yet to kind of really break through, but we had a really good team. We had a kid named Jesse Dong and Pete Yates and Gerard Garnett, and I think Devin Carter might have been a freshman that year. So we went into that tournament with probably 5 or 6 guys that we felt like had a chance to place. We knew none of them were, shoo-ins, right? We didn't have any Mekhi Lewises at that particular point, but it was very disappointing. It's something that took some time to get over for sure. I remember we bussed up there, and then we packed up and we left Saturday night after the finals. Usually you stick around Saturday and you hang out and your guys, go out and have a good time. But yeah, we packed up and came back and just felt like we didn't have anything to sell. There was nothing to celebrate for us. So it was, in a lot of ways, it might've been a blessing though. I think it helped us make some changes, and I think tweak the way we did things to a certain degree in a few areas, and allowed us to implement those changes in the next few years and kind of build to having success and having top 10 finishes. And you got to learn from your failures too, right? And if you don't, it's you're probably just going to keep making the same mistakes. So I thought to our credit, I thought we did a pretty good job making some adjustments.
Was it related to like peaking or length of schedule, or what was it? Some of the
I think so. Yeah, I would say mostly just to peaking and really just not making a huge deal about it, right? I mean, sometimes you can put too much pressure on kids, and I think there's a lot of things. It was a long time ago, but it was definitely I think a wake up call for our staff at that particular point.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk to coaches about how they track and measure progress or changes, because you're not getting the immediate feedback like they were when you were a wrestler. It's pretty easy to track, hey, my goal was to get 100 takedowns today. I did or I didn't. How do you track progress as a coach when sometimes it's so easy to get caught up in your guys? Like, how are you still developing your own game?
Yeah, it's hard to do, right? Especially in the off season. During the season, at least you do have some feedback, and you know how things are going based on match to match. I try to document a lot of things and try to document what we're doing in practice, and what the message is, and really try to be pretty detailed with that, and then look back and compare those to some of the results that we had. And I think that's a good way to do it. And obviously there's just so many factors that play into your success too, right? And sometimes things go well and sometimes they don't, and sometimes it's hard to know exactly why. Yeah. So some of it you have to do from data, and some of it I think you have to do from just general feel for the situation and for your athletes and for the circumstances to a certain degree, if that makes sense.
So you're a big journaler in that sense, or you like typing it out?
No, I type it out, but I do journal too, some stuff. But yeah, typically with our practice plans and stuff, it's in a Word document.
Wow, that's pretty detailed. So you do that and you look back. It's cool to see that because, when you look at your guys's, I always wonder, like, when you look at a head coach's day, what are their buckets of focus? Like, as a podcaster, it's prep, the interview, then editing it. Those are kind of the three buckets, and I got to imagine it's something like, recruiting and practice planning, but one of them is obviously fundraising. You guys just opened a new addition to the room this year. You updated some locker rooms, it looked like. What was the some of the updates that you guys had this year?
Yeah, so we probably raised close to $1 million in the last year. So can you hear me? Can you hear me, Ryan? Your screen's frozen a little bit.
I can still hear you.
Okay, so yeah, we went ahead and completely redid our team locker room, our coaches locker room, gutted our office area, put all new office in with really, really nice. Aesthetically, it's really cool. All glass walls. We put in a lounge. We took out one of the offices and put in a lounge for our guys. So yeah, all in, it's going to be probably close to $700,000 in improvements to those areas. We're still waiting to do our graphics package. We're putting about $40,000 into our audio visual stuff and new sauna going in the locker room. So yeah, a lot of updates and improvements to our facility, which is, and I like doing that kind of stuff. Like, I like the fundraising part of it. I like planning those things. I like being involved in the design of those spaces. So it's been kind of fun for me.
It's sweet to look at. I was doing the 3D tour today. It's amazing how different wrestling facilities look now, even from 20 years ago.
Yeah, it is. I mean, when you travel to some of these places and you go in the facilities that they have, and I'm sure you've been to a few of them. You got to try to keep up with the Joneses, and there's some incredible facilities, especially in the Big Ten right now.
But you were back at Michigan. They didn't have the Bonnet, right? Were you guys in the basement of the Pontiac Center?
No, we were in Chrysler Arena.
Arena, that's what it is.
Which it was like the room is it's basically on the outside of the concourse, so it's kind of arced. It's in like a circular shape. So it was no windows. I mean, you want to talk about being in a dungeon? It was definitely a dungeon.
I didn't realize it was arced like that to like follow the outside of the arena. Well, I wanted to ask you about a couple of non-related things, and then we'll let you get on with your day. But the first is, I noticed from your Instagram, are you a daily ice bather?
I ice bath a lot. Yeah, I enjoy the ice bath. It's something I would do every day if it was a little more convenient. Sometimes I don't do it just because out of convenience. But this year we had to do a lot of it outside because of COVID and our ice baths here at Virginia Tech. They had that area on lockdown, so we set up some tubs outside in the snow. In the summer you can do that, or in the winter you can do that here. But this time of year the ice melts and stay very warm. So but yeah, I enjoy it. I have one set up at my home occasionally as well.
So what's your routine? You go like 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Yeah,
sometimes, sometimes go 10. Just kind of depends on how much time you have that day, I guess, as much as anything.
That's a long time to be in the ice, though. I'm fascinated by people who have like little routines like that. That's one I aspire to do, but I live in an apartment, so I don't know how. Like, so what do you get the ice from like a grocery store, like a cooler bag of ice, and fill it up, or how do you do it?
Well, no, like I said, in the winter it's easy, right? You just let it freeze, and then you go out there and you break up the ice, and that's the best time to do it. This time of year it's a little more difficult. You can buy like a freezer chest. There's people that do that, and then you set a timer where it kicks on so the water stays really cold. I've thought about doing that. I haven't went to those lengths yet. But we have ice baths here at Virginia Tech, so it makes it a little bit better. In fact, our next improvement, getting back to our facility thing, is we're going to put in a recovery room, and I'm looking at getting some really high tech, nice ice baths that basically they have like a self filtration system, and they stay at like 34 degrees. So
Nice.
34 degrees is really cold, by the way.
That's freezing.
You're not staying in for 10 minutes at 34 degrees.
I was just at a spa with my girlfriend, and it's something we do like once a year. They had a cold plunge there. I got in it because I'm like listening to Wim Hof. I'm thinking, I'm hearing a little bit of Tim Ferriss. I'm thinking, all right, this is the year I'm going in for a long time. I got in there literally 10 seconds and I'm freaking out. I asked the person to go, hey, what's that cold plunge at? I'm thinking it must be like 32, 34. They're like 51. I'm like, oh my God. So 30s has got to be a whole nother level of cold.
Yeah, it's just like anything else. So you have to kind of get acclimated to it. And I'll have some guys on our team that I make do it. And at first it's so hard for them, getting over that fear. But once they get used to it, it's really not that difficult. So, you just kind of have to bite the bullet. And after you do it a few times, it gets a lot easier. You actually start to enjoy it after a while.
That's that wrestler mentality. Eventually you start liking things like that. And it's a sickness almost, but like you said, it grows on you. The last thing I wanted to ask you about, Coach, is your rivalry with Ernest Benyon. You guys had some battles, and I look at some of the guys you battled. Your 94 bracket was absurd between Pat, Joe, Sean Bormet, Malika. But then in 95, is that the first time you wrestled Benyon at the Nationals?
Yeah, I had wrestled him at the Virginia Duels that year. And then I wrestled him at the Nationals. What
do you remember about his feel and like what he brought to the table? That's a guy that a lot of people don't remember, and I just want to hear your thoughts on him.
He's really good, really good. Like you said, very probably underappreciated. He got out of wrestling pretty quick after he graduated. So I think people in your area, I'm sure, are probably still familiar with him. But Ernest, I wrestled Ernest 4 times. We split 2 and 2, and he was a great athlete. His balance was unbelievable. I mean, you could pick him up in the air, and it was so hard to finish on. He had great hips, just really good straight in speed. And he was tough, I mean, there was no quitting the guy, I mean, if you were going to beat him, it was going to be, it was going to be a war. And, you had to accept the fact you're probably going to get really, really tired in the process. So he was good. I mean, he beat Joe Williams, his senior year in the Big Ten finals. I think a lot of people forget that. And the year prior to that, in 1996, he really almost beat him in the NCAA finals on kind of a controversial call on the edge of the mat, which very well might have been 2 points. So Ernest was fantastic, great guy too, great person, but just a tremendous competitor. He was a gamer too. He was always a guy that he'd have a couple losses going into the NCAAs, but he did his best wrestling in the NCAAs. But the year that you mentioned, I beat him at the Virginia Duels like 7-2. So I'm in the semis thinking I'm in pretty good shape here. And I ended up losing that match, I think, in overtime, I think, if I remember correctly. But yeah, he was a heck of a competitor and a heck of an athlete.
Now, did you wrestle him your senior year in the semis as well to get to the finals?
I did, yeah. So I wrestled him my junior year in 95. I wrestled him, like I mentioned, the Virginia Duels, and I wrestled him in the NCAA semis. Then I redshirted the following year, and we didn't wrestle that year. And then my senior year, he beat me in the Midland semifinals that year, and then I beat him in overtime in the semifinals in 97, I think it was. Yeah. So, but they were great matches too. I mean, they were fantastic matches.
That was at UNI in 97?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, geez, you look back at your bracket at 95, you had 2 overtime losses. You end up 5th. Like, that's how close it is at that level, pretty crazy. And then the one at the semis your senior year, I don't know if you were a big like self-talk guy, but what, if anything, were you thinking before that match, knowing that it was probably one of the bigger matches of your life?
I think that's probably the biggest adjustment I made from my junior season to my senior season is not allowing my mind to go there thinking about it being the biggest match of my life, right? Yeah. When you think about being the biggest match of your life, it usually doesn't help your performance. So I think probably my junior year kind of just really, putting a lot of pressure on myself, thinking I had to win, I had to be a national champ, to my perspective that my senior year, 2 years later, was basically just go out and wrestle as hard as you can and just try to give great effort. and I think that probably helped me a little bit. But they were both, like I said, all of the match, every time we wrestled, especially the two at the Nationals, could have went either way both times.
Man, fun to think back on those times. Those were great brackets in the NCAAs, and I just want to get your thoughts on them. Before we go to the last question, I got to commend you on your vest game at the Southeast Regional Training Center. Those vests are sweet. I'm a huge vest guy. So whenever you see one,
are you making a plug?
I'm making a plug that I'd like one. Yeah, that's what I'm doing here. Anytime I see, John Smith's vest game is a Twitter account almost. It should be. So whenever I see one, I'm like, all right, those are pretty sweet. And then the last question, Coach, this podcast is called Wrestling Changed My Life. Wrestling is your life, so it's always a little funny to ask college coaches, but, outside of the normal cliches, what's one thing you've taken away from the sport?
Yeah, just a lot of things. I mean, it's changed my life in a ton of different ways, but in terms of just, I guess if there's one takeaway that you take from it is, I think, just the discipline and the hard work and really, if you want to get ahead in life, you got to be committed to it. I mean, there's just no other way to get around that, right? And for me, that was something that I learned through wrestling that I've tried to pass on to my own kids, is that, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And that's just, it always seems to hold true no matter what. And so I guess that's, probably the biggest takeaway, but there's so many. I mean, it's just hard to really put that into words, and without taking up a whole episode on it.
Well, I love how you said that it's about putting together 1,000 days of consistent work. Like you start that, and when you say a perfect day, you don't mean that the results went your way, but that the controllables were controlled to the fullest extent. And so it's like, I've heard you say that you put together 1,000 of those days, then things start to happen.
Yeah, you got to stack them up. You got to stack up good day after good day after good day, and have faith even when you're not getting the results that you want, that it's going to pay off at some point, and it may not be as soon as you want it to be, right? But you got to believe that when you have that kind of mentality and that kind of mindset, and you put in that kind of effort, it's going to pay off for you eventually. So I think wrestling rewards hard work more than any other sport there is out there. And, that's, I think, the one thing that's common for everybody that's participating in this sport, especially at a high level. And that's why you see so many, like we talked about, Eric Tannenbaum and Ryan Bertine and Ryan Sharella. Those guys are crushing it, and they're not in wrestling anymore, but they're crushing it in their careers. They're crushing it with their families, because of all of the things that they learned through wrestling. So, and the list goes on and on. We all know those guys. So,
yeah.
It's great. I've got two of my boys wrestle, and regardless of how the credentials they have when they're done, I'm quite certain that it's going to leave a huge impact on their lives.
Well, it's exciting to see you passing that on to your kids. And I just can't wait to see the future of Virginia Tech. I mean, we didn't even get into some of your current guys, Mecky Lewis, and how incredible he is. And again, just the rise of the ACC is so exciting to me. I wish that we could get them to release the ESPN the rights so we could get some like behind the scene crews in there and start documenting some stuff. I know that's a challenge. It's a blessing and a curse, but I'm just really excited about everything that's going on out there, and wish you nothing but the best, Coach.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on. It was great chatting.
Yes, sir. Take care.